is just write equations given your word problems here. So this was actually on your quiz yesterday. By the way, the one on the quiz was so easy. So easy. This one, not so easy. So the first thing you always have to remember is your formula and what all of those things are called. So what does your A stand for? What does your A stand for? I know, I always forget. A stands for amplitude. The B is your period, but remember you have to use the formula. The formula to get the period. C is going to be your phase shift, but make sure if you're given a word problem, if it says write pi over 2, what does that actually mean? Minus. Because in real life, write is positive, but in your formula, it has to be opposite. And then D is the vertical shift. So when it says write a sine equation, I write y equals, because that's what makes it a graph, I leave some space and I write the word sine. What did I just leave space for in the front? The A, the amplitude. What is your amplitude? 2, and the direction change equals yes means what? Negative. So I'm going to cross off both of those because I took care of both of those. Then the next easiest thing to figure out is the vertical shift. Down 3, where does that go? All the way at the end. So leave some space, put -3 all the way at the end. That's probably too much space, but it's okay. So I just did vertical shift. Phase shift is your B or your C. It's the C. So we just said write 2 in parentheses would turn into what? Positive pi over 2 or negative? Negative because it's opposite. So minus pi over 2. Okay, did that. Then the period is 2 pi. Am I going to put 2 pi into my formula? No, I need to use this formula for the period, 2 pi over b, and set it equal to what they give you, which is 2 pi. Hey guys, what does b have to be? 1, so that 2 over 1 will simplify to just 2. So that means your b value is 1. The b always goes outside parentheses in brackets, but is the 1 really necessary? No. Are the brackets really necessary? No. If you put the brackets every time, you are guaranteed to always get it right. Okay, I'm not going to take points off if you read it like this. But the most simplified version of that would just be x minus pi over 2. Oh man, I just messed it all up. Minus. So that is the most simplified version of the formula. Are we okay? Yes? Maybe? No? Nothing? All right, next question. So for number 2, it says, write a cosine equation. So I'm going to write y equals space and the word cosine. What goes first? Amplitude, which is 3, positive or negative? Positive, y. No direction change. Then the next easiest thing, vertical shift up 4, that goes all the way at the end. Then phase shift of left pi. So in real life, left is negative, but in our formula, it's going to be x plus pi in parentheses. Then the period is equal to 1 pi. So if I have 2 pi over b equal to pi, what does b have to be so that the 2 will cancel? It has to be 2. If that made no sense to you, how do you solve this? Cross multiply. So you would get 2 pi is equal to pi times b. Put the antenna so nobody yells at me. Then divide by pi to get the b alone. They will cancel. B equals 2. Where does that go? Outside the parentheses, but inside of brackets. So because you have a phase shift and a period change, you need parentheses and brackets. Any questions? Okay. Again. Write a cosine equation. Y equals space cosine. Amplitude is 1. Is it necessary to write that? No. Direction changes, no. So that means you don't need a negative or anything. So those are done. Vertical shift up 3.5 is plus 3.5 at the back. And then phase shift is right pi. So in real life, right is positive, but in our equation, it's going to be parenthesis x minus pi. Because when we set that equal to 0, we want our answer to be positive. And then the period is 4 pi. So you have 2 pi over v is equal to 4 pi over 1. Some of us are going to get this wrong, so don't be that person. Okay, you cross multiply. 2 pi is equal to 4 pi b. You divide by 4 pi to get the b alone. The pi should cancel, and don't say 2. What does that reduce to? 1/2. So b is equal to 1/2. That goes outside of the parenthesis, but inside brackets. Any questions on how I got that? Yes? Just yes. Why don't you try one on your own and then ask me questions on that? Okay, so go. Try number 4. Okay, you're talking, which means I think you're done. So who wants to go up to the board and write their answer? I do have candy on my desk. Nancy, pick somebody. Nancy, pick somebody with your hand up. With their hand up. Me? Yes. Okay, ready? And red and green. Okay. It's not yet. It's just a hot mess. Okay, so she's writing y equals negative 2.5. You're good. 2.5.
Oh wait, and then cosine.
Yeah, you're good. All right, so Maggie wrote her equation. Do you agree with her equation? Yeah, so there should be an X right here. But you got the right answer for B. That should be 6. Okay, so choose Maggie. Clap for her. And that's not an exponent. Oh my gosh, it's not an exponent. Okay, we're not doing that yet. So your equation should have been y equals negative 2.5 sine of 6x. Does anybody need me to explain where that came from? Yeah. Because you know how like a coordinate plane has a y and an x-axis? You gotta have both letters for it to be a graph. Okay, so now, yay, let's go to the fun stuff. So
fun.
I know, it's so much fun. So you guys are gonna now write the equation for the graph. So sometimes it will tell you to write a cosine graph, which means you have to go find where is the cosine graph in here. Because I see a sine graph and a cosine graph. Okay, where is the cosine graph? Where does it start at? It's going to start up here, right? And then where does the cosine graph end? Yeah, 2 pi, which is totally normal. That's good, because that means there's less math involved. Okay, so I use my highlighter on the smartboard, sorry. It's kind of broken. So, we highlight one cycle of the cosine graph, which I put up here so that we can remember what it looks like. Okay, so the first thing I do is I find the middle, the max, and the min, just like we did when we were graphing those dotted lines. So where's the middle of this graph? Guess what that's going to be? Your vertical shift. So you're going to write -2 right there. You can write down 2, but we're going to write an equation, so you might as well just put the negative now. Then you need to find your amplitude by getting the maximum and the minimum. How far did you have to go from the middle, be careful, to the top? 4 spaces, okay, because -2 to 2 is positive. Is that a positive cosine graph or a negative cosine graph? It's positive, so keep that positive 4. Okay, oh, also for function, you can write cos because it told us it was cosine. It will not always tell you, we'll get there. Okay, then you need to find your b value or your period. So this is starting at 0 and ending at 2 pi. Is that normal or no? That's normal, right? So the formula technically is 2 pi over b. It's equal to 2 pi this time because that's how long it took us to get through one cycle. So what does b have to equal? Just 1. And then we are going to try to avoid phase shifts at all costs. Okay, so if you are starting on the y-axis, that means there is no phase shift. We didn't move to the left or to the right at all. So we're always going to look at the y-axis so that we don't have to write phase shifts. Some of you are super smart and you're like, couldn't I have started here and written a sine graph? Doesn't the blue graph look like sine? Yeah, you're making more work for yourself, and the more complicated you make your equation, the longer it takes me to grade your quizzes and your tests. So if you do it simply like I'm going to teach you, then I can grade faster. If you want to be super, super smart and be a super genius and come up with really fancy equations for all of this stuff, you're probably right. I'll figure it out, but it's going to take me forever to grade your quizzes and tests. So try to avoid the phase shifts at all costs and start by writing your equation on the y-axis so that we don't have to worry about a c value. So there is no phase shift. Okay, my amplitude is my a value. What's my vertical shift? B, C, or D? Vertical shift is D. Period, I already told you is B. Phase shift is C, which we have. So you write y equals in the front. Your a value is 4. Write the word cosine. The b value is 1, so is it necessary? No. So just x. You don't need parentheses or brackets because you don't have a b or a c. So you don't need those things. And then you write what at the very end? -2, boom, done, answer. Yes. Was that bad or no? No, not bad. Okay, so let's do another cosine equation, except I don't see a positive cosine in there anywhere. What do you see though? A negative cosine. So can I avoid the phase shift at this point in time?
No.
No, I cannot start on the y-axis. I have to start right here. So highlight one cycle of cosine. Cosine should start at the top and end at the top, but since it's negative cosine, it's starting at the bottom and ending at the bottom. Okay, so once you highlight one cycle of cosine, go ahead and find your middle, your max, and your min. So where is the middle here? It's at 3. The maximum is at 9, and the minimum is at -3. So when it says function, you write cosine because they told us. How are you going to get your amplitude? Count how far the maximum is from the middle. Okay, that's going to be your amplitude. My amplitude, how far did I have to go? 6. Okay, it should be the same for the minimum as well. How far did you have to go to get from 3 to -3? 6 spaces. Wait a minute. Yeah, Danny said it's negative. Is your amplitude -6? No, what do we know about that graph? It has a direction change. So I'm going to write that here. I also sometimes just write my function as negative cosine. Isn't that true? It's just a negative cosine graph. So if you write the negative in the function spot, I tend to not forget it. If I write direction change, then I forget the negative and I get it wrong. Okay, so I put that under the function section. How do I get the vertical shift? It's the middle. Where's the middle? +3. Yes, got it. Okay, now, oh no. Okay, I need to find the distance from where I started to where I ended. That is the period. So where did I start this graph? -π/2. And I went all the way to what? What the heck is this? 5π/2. How did they get that? Counted, right? So you're going 1π/2, 2π/2, 3π/2, 4π/2, 5π/2. So how far did you go? Okay, Nick says 3π. Do we agree? Disagree? We're not sure. Agree? Okay, so you can subtract these numbers, like remember how like you find the distance? Okay, so distance is always absolute value. So we're going to do 5π/2 minus negative, so that's going to change to plus, π/2. So that's technically like 5/2, right? Plus 1/2, which gives you 6π/2, and that reduces to 3π. Also, guys, I put absolute value bars because distance is always positive. You can never have a negative period of a graph. Okay, it's always positive. So your period is going to be 3π, but is that the b value? No, what do I have to do with it? Equal it to what? 2π/b. This one you probably have to cross multiply for to figure out. So when I cross multiply, 1 times 2π is 2π. 3π times b is 3πb. You divide by 3π on both sides. The pi cancels, the 3 cancels. What is b equal to? 2/3. Just did all of that work to get my new b value. I'm going to put it right there. And then I hate my life because there's a phase shift, and I don't want to use brackets and parentheses, but you have no choice if I say write a cosine function. So what is the phase shift? Where did I begin? -π/2, but when you write your equation, you're going to write +π/2. Good job. So now that I have all of that information, this is A, D, B, and the phase shift is C, so you can go ahead and write it. So y equals, what's my amplitude? -6, good, it's 6 with a direction change. Then it's the word cosine. Then you have to put your bracket. I used A, now I need B. B is 2/3, parenthesis x. Now I need C. Make sure you do the opposite. So +π/2. And then the last thing that you need is your vertical shift. So that would be plus. That is your final answer. That also has every single transformation that we have ever done in our entire life in one equation. Okay, I think there's one of those on your test where you have to do everything. Yes?
Did you forget the second bracket?
I did. Thanks. Yes, John. So the vertical shift is wherever the middle of your graph is. Yes. Any other questions on this specific problem? Okay, so now let's go write a sine graph. So sine starts at the middle and ends at the middle. So is that good for this question? Did we start in the middle of that graph on the y-axis? Yes, that's good. That means no phase shift. Right away, none. Okay, so I started at the middle and I need to end at the middle, which is right here. which we're going to pretend is at 2 pi. All right. Oh, it is at 2 pi. This is, sorry. So this should start and end at the same place in the middle, so that's where it ends, right here at 2 pi. So I found my middle after I highlighted my 1 cycle of sine. What else do I need? I need the max and the min. So it doesn't say function up here, but I'm going to write it because is that a positive sine graph or a negative sine graph? It's negative sine. So I'm going to write that in because I want to remember if I need my positive or my negative. What's my vertical shift going to be? You're right. So that's at positive 3 in the middle. So that's my vertical shift. And then how do you get your amplitude? Yeah, you count from the middle. So I went up 2 and down 2. So that's my amplitude. Okay, so I start at 0 and I end at 2 pi. So what's the period of that graph? 2 pi, that means your B value is 1. Remember, this is A, this is D, this tells you it's B, this is C. I think we found everything that we need. So go write your equation. Don't forget the y equals negative, what? 2 sine. Is there a B value? Is there a C value? So no parentheses, no brackets, just X. And then plus 3. That is your final answer. Are you excited to do more problems? So excited. Okay. So another sine graph. Do you want to try this by yourself? Oh, this is pi over 2, and this is pi. So why don't you try this by yourself and see if you can figure it out. This is pi over 2. And this is pi. So the only number you really need to have is the number. That's right. That's right. Okay, so your amplitude here, be careful because your y-axis is counting by a half. So how far did you go from the middle to the top? 2, so that's your amplitude. Your vertical shift is going to be nothing. The period is only pi, so you're going to use your formula. 2 pi over b is equal to pi over 1. If you cross multiply and solve that, you should get b equals 2. Okay, then remember we're trying to avoid that phase shift at all costs, so no phase shift. And your equation is going to be y equals 2 sine of 2x. If you didn't put the parentheses, it is okay, but they should technically have parentheses. Do you have any questions for me on that one? All right, now I would be super nice and tell you if it's going to be sine or cosine every time, if that's how it was on your test, but it's not. So on your test, it's going to say write the equation. There's not going to be any like information here about sine or cosine. There's not going to be any of this. It's just going to say equation. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to get really good at figuring out if it's sine or cosine. I want to avoid the phase shift at all costs. So if you're trying not to shift things, where do both of our graphs begin normally? On the y-axis. So my hint is look at the y-axis. After you look at the y-axis, determine whether that graph is touching the y-axis at a middle, a minimum, or a maximum. So if you're looking at this graph right here, it touches the y-axis here. Is that a middle, a minimum, or a maximum of that specific graph? That's a minimum because it's the bottom. Okay, so if you're starting at a minimum, can you be sine? Where does sine start? In the middle. So that means if you look at the y-axis and sine starts, or your graph starts at the middle, then you're going to use the sine function. Okay. If your graph starts at a max or min, you're going to use the cosine function. If you're starting at a max, that's a positive cosine function. So if you're starting at a min, it's going to be a negative cosine function. So I'm going to write negative cosine right there. Yes?
So is the graph line always going to hit the y-axis?
No. So I will get there. But there are like 10 million correct answers for all of these questions. So I'm going to show you the easiest way to get the correct answer. So you should be able to, for 98% of the problems, look at the y-axis and they will start there. But I'll show you one where it doesn't. Okay, so I found my minimum. That's great. Now go get your maximum and then find your middle. Where is the middle here? What do you think the middle is? Okay, I think it's 5, but like I'm not sure. So how could I check? Count and make sure it's the same both ways, right? It has to be dead center. So this is up to and down to, you know you're in the middle. Okay, so is the middle the amplitude or the vertical shift? Vertical shift, so my vertical shift is +5. That's my D value. What's my A value? 2, we just counted it. Okay, then you need to go, I don't highlight until right now that I don't know what word I'm using. So, oh, my highlighter's working. I need 1 cycle of cosine. So cosine, if it's starting at a minimum, it needs to end at a minimum. Okay, remember it's an even function, so it should start and end at the same place. Okay, so this is 1 period of this cosine function. How do I know how far it went? Okay, think about this. This is 1 pi, right? How many spaces did I have to go to get to 1 pi? 4. So what am I counting by? Pi over 4. So this is 1 pi. Oops. Now the highlighter works too. This is 1 pi over 4. This is going to be 2 pi over 4, which reduces to pi over 2. Do you need to keep counting? No, you found the end of your cosine graph. Stop counting. Use that number. The period of this cosine graph is pi over 2. So you have to take your formula, 2 pi over b, and equal it to pi over 2. What do you do to solve that? Cross multiply, right? So I'm going to get 4 pi is equal to pi b. I'm going to divide by pi on both sides. So what's my b value? 4. Do I have a phase shift? No, don't ever do a phase shift if you don't have to. So there is no phase shift. Now that you've found all of that information, you can go ahead and write your equation. So make sure you have y equals at the front. Your amplitude is 2, but it's a negative cosine, so put negative 2 cosine parenthesis 4x. I don't need my brackets because I don't have a phase shift. So 4x only, and then what do you need at the back? Plus 5. That is your final answer. Okay, let's try again. Number 6. So always look at your y-axis. Where does that hit the y-axis? A max, a min, or a middle? It's a max, so that means you're using a cosine, positive cosine or negative cosine? Positive cosine function. And then go ahead and find your middle between those two. So I think my middle is 5 again. And I checked to make sure that's right because I went up 2 and down 2, so I know that's good. So that 5 is my vertical shift, so plus 5. My amplitude is what? 2 again. Okay, then, after I get all of that information, I get out my highlighter and I highlight one cycle of cosine. So cosine starts at a max, and it also needs to end at a max. So go until you hit a nice point, which is right there. No, just there. So where do we stop that graph? 5 pi. So that means that the b is 5 pi? No, that's the period. We need to find b by solving. So 2 pi over b is equal to 5 pi over 1, technically. Then you would cross multiply. 2 pi times 1 is just 2 pi. 5 pi times b is 5 pi b. I want the b alone, so divide by 5 pi on both sides. B is equal to what? 2 over 5. Just a lot of work for that. And then is there a phase shift? No, because we started on the y-axis, so no phase shift. So when you go to write your equation, y equals 2 for my amplitude, cosine, make sure you have your parentheses, 2 over 5x, but you don't need brackets because there's no phase shift. And then your vertical shift is 5, so plus 5, that is your final answer. Is that the only answer? No, there are multiple answers. There are lots of answers. You could write a sine graph. You could do lots of different things. Yes, sir.
Did you move the box?
Yes, I can. Say that again. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you're always going to have that's always for the period, you're always going to have 5 pi over 1 if there's nothing else on the if there's a fraction.
Choice.
Okay. Next page. Oh, they're so nice. They gave us the middle and everything. This is great. So when you're looking at number 7, go ahead and mark where you touch the y-axis. That is a max, a min, or a middle. It's a max, so that means I know I'm going to be using a positive cosine function. Every time you guys talk while I'm talking, I decide I'm not grading your quizzes. So not great. Okay, so that's at a max, so that's a positive cosine function. And lucky for us, they gave us the middle. Where is the middle? It's at -1. That's your vertical shift, which is your D value. Okay, I know already I have no phase shift because I did start on the y-axis. And then I'm going to highlight one period of that cosine graph. So if I start at a max, I also want to end at a max. Okay, I did forget the amplitude. Oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? What is the amplitude? 3. Good. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. So amplitude is 3. Wait a minute. Is that a positive cosine graph? Why is that a positive cosine graph? It starts at the top. Good job. Okay, so then the period is what? How long did it take me to get to the end of that graph? 1 pi. So that means 2 pi over b has to be equal to 1 pi. Guys, what do I divide 2 by to get 1? 2. So that means without even solving, you know b is equal to 2. So you write your equation. Y equals 3 cosine, parenthesis 2x. I don't need brackets because there's no phase shift. And then my vertical shift is downward. So much easier. Okay, so let me just talk. You guys can put your pencils down. You don't have to write anything. Let me just talk about what would a sine graph look like there. How would I write a sine graph? Where would I have to start that graph? Okay, so there's multiple options. Can't I start it right here and then go like that? Right? Okay, so that would be shifted back. I don't even know what number that is right now, and I don't feel like figuring it out, so guess what? I'm not going to use it. Okay, I also could start that sine graph. Couldn't I make it a negative sine graph and write it like that? Okay, you have a phase shift there, so do you want to use that? I don't even know what those numbers are on that graph. I don't know how it's counting. That's making so much work for yourself. Don't do it. Okay, if you want to start with this sine graph, still, oops, right there, don't even know what number is before 1 pi. So use what is there to your advantage. Don't go ahead and make things super complicated unless you want it to take you forever to grade your quizzes and tests yet. Go for it. Yes. So this has a horizontal compression because we usually make it all the way to 2 pi, but this time we only made it to 1 pi. So that means the period is smaller because it's a compression.
Okay, so if it stretched out,
Yes. You would have, like, this isn't stretched. I'm trying to think of one that's stretched out. This one is stretched out because we're making it all the way to 4 pi. So for this one, you're going to have a different number in front of x. It only changes the b value. It doesn't change anything else. Okay, so number 8. Guys, guess what? What's number 8? Cosine or sine? It's sine, because if you look at your y-axis, where are you starting? In the middle. So that means we finally get to write a sine function, and you have to be super careful because what kind of sine function is that? Negative sine function. So I found they gave me my middle. My middle is always my vertical shift, so my new vertical shift is down 2. Remember, this is A, this is D, that tells me it's B, and this is C. I have no phase shift at all, because I'm trying to avoid that at all costs, because I'm starting right on the y-axis. What is my amplitude? 1. And then you highlight one cycle of sine. Sine should start in the middle and end at the middle. So that means I make it to 2 pi. So is that different than normal? No. So if you did 2 pi over b is equal to 2 pi, b has to be 1. There is no period change there. So you don't really need that 1 in your equation, nor do you need the amplitude of 1 in your equation. Okay, so when you write this, it would be y equals negative sine x, then what? Minus 2. I'm gonna get through 9 and 10 and then I'm gonna be done. So can you guys like wake up a little bit and be more excited about life? No? Okay, I try. You can either go through life being super boring and not excited, and you can go through life being super excited and make it sound better. And then your teenagers. Okay. So remember, also I forget that like I love pre-calc and I love math, so like this makes me happy. I know it doesn't make you happy. So for number 9, there are no there's no words there. There's no like amplitude, vertical shift, period, change, any of that. So you have to remember or figure out what you're doing. So I go like this, off to the side, so that it helps me out. Okay, so D is your vertical shift, which is your middle. So where is my middle here? 1. And then I heard somebody say this before, but what function is this? Are we starting on the y-axis at a middle, a max, or a min? Middle, so it's going to be sine. So I write the word sine, and I put my y equals in the front so I don't forget. Then I found my middle is positive 1, so that's the D value. What's my amplitude going to be? 2, good, because I had to go up 2 and down 2. So that's my amplitude. Is that a positive sine graph or a negative sine graph? Positive. Okay, then I need the B and the C. Am I going to have a C? No, because I'm starting on the y-axis. So for your B value, you have to do 2 pi over B is equal to, yeah, look at this. So I went up, down, back to the middle. I made it all the way to 4 pi. So that's 4 pi over 1. Cross multiply, 2 pi is equal to what? 4 pi B. And this is where people mess up, don't mess up. What does B equal? Yeah, 1/2. Okay, so after I got that, I can go ahead and fill in my entire equation. So y equals 2 for A. What do you need if you have a B value? Parentheses, 1/2 x, and then plus 1. And that is your final answer. Okay, try number 10 by yourself.